Hi everybody, this is Rob Flux here from Property Developer Network, coming to you once again for another Sunday session. This is going to be the last Sunday session of the year. It's been a fantastic year for myself and for the Property Developer Network community. We have grown massively in the last 12 months, having expanded into Sydney, where we've been running there for well over 12 months. And Newmarket in Melbourne, where we're now at about the 7-month mark. So quite proud of where we've come from, considering our very humble beginnings of 5 people sitting around our kitchen table. This is, I guess, a fantastic growth for us, and it's setting ourselves up for a fantastic new year coming into the new year. Now, today's Sunday session is going to be all about stacking strategies, but more on that in a moment or two. Before I get into that, I'm just going to go through a little bit of logistics, considering we're just coming into the end of the year, just to set everybody up for a fantastic finish and a fantastic start to next year. So firstly, our very last meetup has already been held in Sydney and Melbourne for the year, and our last one will be for Brisbane next Saturday. Now, it's not a normal meetup here in Brisbane. Because it's the third Saturday of the month, the third Saturday happens to be December the 21st. And so if I ran a normal meetup, I'm pretty sure that not many people would turn up, being only 4 days from Christmas. So instead, it's going to be purely a Christmas drinks. And in return, we're going to, I guess, run an early session in January, on January the 25th. I can't remember the exact date in January. Either way, but our actual next meetup for Brisbane will be in January. For Sydney, our next meetup will be January the 25th. That's the Australia Day long weekend holiday. So please make sure that, I guess, you are around for that. And for Melbourne, our next meetup is going to be February the 1st. Now, Melbourne is the first Saturday of the month, and the first Saturday of the month is a little bit too close to the new year. So we're going to push that out to February the 1st. But luckily for Melbourne, it's a leap year. So we're actually going to have 2 meetings in February. So the second meeting will be on February the 29th. So for those of you in Melbourne, no meetups in January, 2 meetups in February. February the 1st and February the 29th. So that's the logistics done. Let's talk about stacking strategies, shall we? So before I go too far, I guess, why would we be wanting to why would we want to stack strategies? Okay, so firstly, there are multiple reasons to do this. It helps you to minimize your cost. So if you're stacking multiple development strategies at the same time, it's one set of acquisition costs, it's one set of holding costs, it's one set of sales commissions, etc., etc. So if you're able to do more than one development strategy on that site, you're able to layer your profits, okay? So you improve your profits that much that you may be able to get potentially twice the uplift from the property, depending upon what it is that you're actually trying to do. This helps you to fast track your progress to financial freedom, and gives you a greater potential to keep your profits as stock at the end of it. And you've heard me say before that if you're able to keep stock rather than sell stock, it means you're able to minimize your tax. And so it's quite important that we want to get to a position where we're holding stock as much as we can and benefiting from the positive cash flow that actually generates in the process. There's also less competition for the site. And the reason why there's less competition for the site is there's less people that have the skills and capability to run multiple strategies. So if it's 2 strategies stacked back to back, you may have some people with skills for one strategy, some people with skills for the second strategy, but not many people with the skills for both. And so by being able to identify a site like that, you're effectively beating out a lot of your competition who just don't know how to layer that level of complexity in a deal. The other thing that you can do is you can potentially make a deal out of a sites that wouldn't necessarily work with a single strategy alone. And so there may be sites that you may be able to pick up at a bargain because no other developer is actually competing for them, because as a single strategy, it just doesn't seem to stack up. So when I talk about strategies, it's actually quite, not difficult, it's quite important to be able to separate your development strategy from 2 other strategies that you're actually going to need in the process. So firstly, your development strategy is that determines the skills that you need to learn to meet your financial goals and objectives given your constraints of time, risk, and money. So what that development strategy is, and there's a range of them that are going to go through pretty soon. But generally speaking, your development strategy, you're going to lock in stone and say, this is the strategy that I'm going to learn. This is the one I'm going to master. This is the one I'm going to execute for the next little while whilst I master my craft. When you go to actually do the development though, there's two other strategies that then start to come into play. So firstly, there's your acquisition strategy. Now your acquisition strategy tends to be more tactical, okay? So this is applied to each and every deal subject to your current situation and your current financial constraints at that point in time. So you're looking at your financial constraints around your equity, your serviceability, and your liquidity. Because when you go into a deal at any one particular time, how you are going into that deal and how you are going into the next deal are going to be different. So the acquisition strategy that you apply may be completely different as you get more and more experience and as you get more and more cash in your kitty, and also as you get more projects running in parallel, you may need to be a little bit more fluid in your acquisition strategies, okay? The more access that you have to your financial resources, then clearly the more choices you have in and around your acquisition model, okay? However, if you have some limitations in your equity, some limitations in your serviceability, or some limitations in your liquidity, then your acquisition strategy may be very tactical because it's the only way that you can acquire the property. And so getting terms on the deal is probably the most important thing if you're short in any of those three areas. And that may limit the ability to actually acquire the site because the vendor may not be willing to give those terms. That said, whenever you're trying to do something on terms, you're either going to give some of your profits away to the vendor, or some of the profits through to a money partner, or some profits away in a higher interest rate to somebody else. But what I'm saying to you here is that by being tactical in that approach, you're going to be able to get at least 50% of something, which is better than 100% of nothing. So assuming that you've got your development strategy locked in, you've come up with an acquisition strategy as to how you're actually going to acquire that next particular project, then the last thing that you want to consider is the exit strategy. And you should always consider your exit strategy at the very, very start of the process, because it informs things like how you set up your entities. It informs how you set up your JV arrangements if you're doing JVs. It informs how you're going to set up your tax structures, a whole bunch of things like that. So it's really, really important that you actually understand what that exit strategy is right up front. It's going to determine how and when you cash in your profits. And I'm going to say if at all, because the ultimate goal is to not sell your finished product. The ultimate goal is to keep a property that you actually own as close to outright as possible, but at minimum positively geared, based on the fact that you've manufactured the profits into the deal. And that's then able to hold its own space for the next number of years, allowing it to grow with both capital growth and also generate you an income stream. So that's the ultimate goal. In the early days, it may take a little while to get to that position, but I guess that is the ultimate goal. So whether or not you sell, you're going to be determining that, I guess, strategically right at the start of the project to understand how that's going to do. The other thing that I would suggest to you is to always have multiple exit strategies, because whilst you have one exit strategy in mind, invariably things tend to happen, and it gets very difficult sometimes for you to actually be able to execute on the original plan. And so if you've got multiple exit strategies in mind, if circumstances change, that gives you the flexibility to be able to, I guess, go with the flow, so to speak, and make sure that you can manage your outcomes towards the end. So you can't control, for example, whether or not your money partner happens to lose their job. You can't control, for example, whether or not the stock market crashes and the market goes against you. There's a number of things outside of your control, outside of the project, and so having multiple exit strategies is actually quite important. So let's now go back and actually have a look at those. So there's three elements. There's the development strategy, the acquisition strategy, and your exit strategy. So those three elements. So let's break those down into a little bit more detail. Let's have a look at the development strategy. And as you know, my recommendation is to always make sure that you have a single development strategy which is your primary strategy that you're going to be executing on, I guess, for the next few years. The reason that I suggest that is because otherwise you become jack of all trades and master of none. And what we want you to do is become an expert in that one strategy, learn one set of rules, and start to apply them very efficiently and very effectively in the areas that you choose. Now, there's a ton of different strategies to choose from. There are cash flow strategies, there's cash cow strategies, there's things that generate positive cash flow, there's things that generate, I guess, large capital gains. And depending upon your skills, your experience, how quickly you need to be paid, how much negative cash flow you can afford until payday, remembering that the process of property development means money is leaving your pocket and it doesn't come back until the day you sell that finished product. So, you know, that negative cash flow, it's quite important that if you can't afford that, then it might eliminate some of the strategies that you might have in mind. So let's have a look at some of those typical strategies that people might consider. So obviously there's buy and hold type strategies, which is your normal typical investor. Now, those people tend to do off the plan. They might do house and land packages. A lot of them do negative gearing. I'm going to highly recommend that we never ever consider negative gearing ever again. Positive gearing is obviously a key outcome and a thing called executive leasing, okay? The next kind of strategy would be a thing called multiple keys. So that's duplexes, dual occupancies, granny flats, auxiliary dwellings, secondary dwellings, all those sorts of things. So we're actually getting two lots of keys for the one title, okay? So generally it allows multiple sets of income to come from that. There's a little bit more of an advanced execution of some of those things. So things that are called houses of multiple occupancy. So this is where you're starting to have multiple keys with more than two keys within the one building. So you tend to be renting per room. So it could be rooming accommodation, could be boarding houses, could be Airbnb, could be NDIS, those sorts of things. And then you've also got commercial properties. So you've got industrial, office, medical, retail, signage, et cetera, et cetera. And so understanding those positive cash flow strategies as the ultimate goal in generating cash moving forward, the challenge is that in order to own those properties, you need to have a reasonable amount of equity up front. And so typically what we find is people go into the development process to generate the capital growth using what I call cash cow strategies to force value onto the property in order to, through the property development process, okay? So through your own skills, your own expertise. So some of those strategies there would include renovations, spec homes, house relocations. You might do subdivisions that might either be a splitter or a boundary realignment, maybe a small lot subdivision. You might do battle axes, you might do corner lots, you might do, I guess, 4 or 5 in what they call brownfield, which is kind of infilling existing developed land, or you might go much larger in size to what they call greenfield, which is you doing out in the emerging areas, what used to be rural land, you're actually now converting it into land subdivisions. You could also then go down an alternate route, which is, I guess, multi-res development, so units or townhouses, medium-rise, high-rise, relocatable home parks, those sorts of things, okay? All of those are quite possible. And if you want to consider the commercial space, then again, you can do developments in the commercial space, and you might want to consider doing childcare, aged care, retail, office, medical, industrial, et cetera, et cetera. So there's a number of different strategies in there. My guidance to you is to pick just one of those strategies. Every single one of them can be profitable and will be profitable if you specialize in it and you find exactly how and where they actually belong. Now, if you are doing that appropriately, then you'll start to become a master of that and become very efficient and very effective in the process. That said, that primary strategy can then have other strategies stacked on top of it. We're going to talk to some of those as we go. Now, let's talk to some of the acquisition strategies that we're going to consider now. So that was the development strategies. Now let's talk to the acquisition strategies. So in considering what your acquisition strategy is going to be, and remember I said that this is tactical. This is based on where am I right here, right now, given my current situation. And the things that you want to consider here are, I guess there are 3 elements with regards to funding any particular deal that need to come into fruition. So firstly, you're going to need a deposit to actually purchase the property. That can be in the form of either cash or equity in another property. You're going to need serviceability in order to fund the loan or fund the debt. And you're going to need liquidity in order to run the deal. So those 3 elements are going to be required to actually get into the deal. Now, you're also going to need that at 3 stages during the process. So you're going to need that for the initial purchase. You're going to need that through any construction funding that you might be required. So if you're actually going to take something through and actually build something. And also if you're going to refinance to keep the existing stock. So those 3 elements are going to be needed 3 times in the process. So depending upon where you are in that process, whether or not you have a deposit, whether or not you have the serviceability, and whether or not you have the liquidity, you may need to be very tactical in how you acquire the property in order to plug the gap in where you're actually short. Okay? So if we do a little bit of a self-assessment, if you have little or no working equity, that is, you don't have anything that's going to actually allow you to actually do a deposit on the property, and it's also you're not going to have any money to actually fund and run the deal, then you're going to be wanting to consider a no money down deal. Okay, and I'm going to talk to the no money down type strategies a little bit later, but I've done an entire segment on no money down previously. If you've got no workable equity, sorry, let me rephrase that. If you've got workable equity but no serviceability, then you may want to do a joint venture with a serviceability partner, or potentially a joint venture with the actual landowner. That's going to help you massively as well. If you have workable equity and serviceability, then you can fund your own deal, and you may be able to run the deal all the way through to completion. But why would you? Because if you use some of these creative acquisition strategies, then you may get to a situation where you can actually do 2 or 3 deals at the same time with the same amount of funds. And so what you may find is if you get 100% of profit doing the deal all by yourself with all your own money, you can only do 1 deal. But if you do 3 deals with the same amount of money and you get to keep 50% each time, now you get 150% return rather than 100% return. And so many people choose to say, well, maybe I'll do those more creative acquisition strategies even though I have money, because it allows my money to go further and allows me to run more deals at the same time. So how do we do some of these? Okay, so there's a couple of different ways that we can do these. There's, I guess, through the contract process, there's a couple of different ways that you can do that under terms. So you may want to do delayed settlements. You may want to do subject to development approvals, those sorts of things that allow you the ability and the flexibility to buy you time in the process, okay? Because time is the most valuable commodity in this mechanism. Options contracts is another way. So there are things called call options and things called put and call options. An option contract is the right but not the obligation to purchase a property at a predetermined price. So given the ability to control the property for that predetermined period of time, then allows you to actually add the value without ever actually owning it, okay? The other thing that you could do is a joint venture. And again, a joint venture could be with an external money partner, or it could actually be with the vendor themselves, in which case they actually stay in the deal. Or you could do a thing called vendor deposit, okay? So the vendor may help you to fund the finance. So hypothetically, you may have enough money to service the loan, but you may not have enough equity in order to put down the deposit. So the vendor says, well, I will fund you the 20%. I will keep that money in the deal by me maintaining a stake in that deal, and you will either pay them an interest rate or you'll pay them a profit share in the process. Other acquisition strategies that you may want to consider would be buying under discount. So there are 5 Ds that you want to consider with your discount acquisition strategies. So divorce, death, debt, distance, and disaster. So those 5 Ds, in any of those instances where you come across those, you will generally find that people are in a situation where one of 2 things is going to happen. Either they are in the need of urgent money and they're willing to do anything in order to get that urgent money, or they're in a situation where they're, I guess they have multiple people fighting over things, and they must get the maximum amount of return out of that. But it's an opportunity for you to consider. So divorce, for example, this might be the one and only time that one partner gets to cash in on the wealth of the other partner. Or it may be that they want to get out as quick as humanly possible because they just want it over. In a death situation, it could be that everybody's grieving. They just want the process over very, very quickly. Or it could be that there are 20 children involved and every single one of them want to get the maximum return so they get the most amount of money for themselves. Wherever there's distance, for example, maybe the owner is interstate. They're not quite aware of what the market is. Or my favorite is where the agent is out of area, and the agent, A, doesn't know the area that well, and B, doesn't really want to travel for an hour or two in order to get to the area to do open homes and things like that. And so they're wanting it off their books very, very quick. So wherever you see those sorts of things. And lastly, disaster. So disaster is a short-term opportunity where, for example, there might have been a cyclone, an earthquake, a flood, or something along those lines, where there's been a short-term something that's impacted the market, but long-term, there's a huge amount of capital growth in the area. And so there's a short-term opportunity to actually acquire. There's also things called developer discounts. So the ability to buy and sell on builders' terms or developers' terms may enable you to acquire properties and or on-sell property, I guess your finished stock, to other people on different terms that will allow some flexibility in the process. So some of those no money down strategies that I mentioned before, we've got deal finding, we've got option contracts, we've got trading blocks, which is really a fancy way of using that option trade, option contract to acquire multiple blocks in bulk. And by buying multiple blocks in bulk, you may be able to get a much larger discount on that process. And then one by one, you on-sell those through different builders, through house and land packages, etc. You can also get money through project management and running other people's projects. Or my favorite is using other people's monies where there's joint ventures and or private loans. Okay, so all of those acquisition strategies are going to help you in the process to be able to tactically acquire the property. Okay, so where you can tactically acquire the property, that's going to then allow you, using flexible acquisition models, that's then going to potentially allow you to defer a lot of costs, and in some instances even avoid costs in the process. And in doing so, that's going to help you massively with your cash flow and also help you massively in your profitability. And then largely of those three strategies, then you've got your exit strategy. So your exit strategy then is going to, is going to be determined by a number of factors. So this is really strategic. So your acquisition is tactical. Your exit strategy is strategic. So what you're trying to do is to say, what am I going to do right now to get out of this deal that's going to set me up for the next deal or set me up for my long-term financial goals? So that's one of those two paths that you're going to go down, and it's a very strategic type decision. And what you're going to do is you're going to look at the liquidity of your funds at this point in time. You're going to look at your appetite for risk. You're going to understand that, I guess, the time that you're able to commit in going into the next project and how long your funds are going to be tied up for in this project, depending upon how the project is actually going to run. You're going to look at your current skills, and you're also going to look at the requirement to roll over funds into the next project. And based on that, what you may determine is a number of different ways to exit the same deal. So for example, you may choose that you're going to sell as a DA approved site. So you'll acquire it or control it, either one, get it to the point where you've got your development approval, and then flick it on before actually doing any construction element itself. Alternatively, you may choose, depending upon what the development strategy is, you may choose that you're going to sell them as, for example, land only. So maybe you're doing a townhouse project and you might have a stage 1, stage 2. Stage 1 might be separate the existing house, which might be protected. You might subdivide that off. Then you might sell the DA approved land that is already separated from the existing home as an example. Or if you're doing a land subdivision, you may sell just the land as raw land. You may sell off the plan, which means that you're looking at taking it all the way through to completion, but the completion element, you're going to need to de-risk that by guaranteeing you've got some, I guess, surefire money coming at the end of the project. So you'll sell off the plan before you do any construct. You may have to sell at a discount in order to do that, but it means that you're de-risking the project before you actually get to peak debt. The next one you might want to consider is maybe selling as a finished product. So this time you're not going to sell off the plan. You're actually going to take it all the way through the end, have it fully finished, and have the ability for people to walk through it and see the finished quality and all that sort of stuff. And that's going to help you potentially achieve a higher sale price, but it obviously means that in achieving that higher sale price, you're now at peak debt in your project, which means that your holding costs are hurting you. So the requirement to sell quickly starts to build, the pressure on that starts to build very, very quickly. So that's quite important to be considering where that is. The other thing that you might do is, as you're starting to do larger developments, you may choose to stage your developments. So for example, if you're doing a 30 townhouse project, you may choose stage 1 is 10, stage 2 is another 10, stage 3 is another 10. By staging your developments, you manage your cash flow. You also help massively with the fact that you aren't your own competition. If you put 30 stock on the market all at once, then people are going to sense that there's a bargain in the area. But if you say, no, there's only 10 to choose from and they're going quick, and there's a scarcity mentality, then people will want to lap them up pretty quick and grab whatever it is that they can. And the last exit strategy that you want to consider is whether or not you are actually going to be keeping the stock as profit. And as I said, that is the ultimate goal that you're trying to aim for in this whole process, given time. So now some of the things that you also want to consider in that process from an exit strategy perspective is a thing called total development cost versus peak debt. So total development cost is, if I just ran everything from start to end, what would be the maximum debt that I'm going to? Whereas peak debt might be a lower level, which is how much can I actually afford to go to? And what you may find is your peak debt doesn't equal your total development cost. And so you've got to consider, is there something that I can sell early in the process that will cash me down, that I can then reload that cash and go in a second time and keep under that peak debt? So if my peak debt is here and my total development cost is here, then I go up and up, then I sell down, and then I come back up again. So for example, keeping a nice simple example, if I'm doing a 1:2 subdivision, I may not have enough funds to develop and construct 2 existing homes. So I may choose to sell down 1 vacant block of land early in the process, cash in, pay down some of my debt, reload that cash, and then just build 1 house on the remaining lot. So things like that need to be considered in the process. So all of those, I guess that's really the 3 strategies that you're looking at. You've got your development strategy, you've got your acquisition strategy, and then you've got your exit strategy. So those 3, you want to be looking at how you actually stack those in order to achieve the outcome that you're trying to achieve. Then on top of that, you've then got, well, what if I can actually stack 2 development strategies onto the 1 project? So I might have a primary strategy, for example, which might be subdivisions. So all I'm doing all day, every day is creating vacant blocks of land. Now that's great, and that generates a profit. But if I'm then able to stack another strategy on top of that, then I would consider, well, what is the final product that is actually going to be constructed on that vacant block of land? And so it could be, for example, that the vacant block of land is normally just a home, in which case, I guess a spec home strategy is what you stack on top of it. Or it could be that there's an opportunity there for a home with a granny flat, in which case you've got a dual income type strategy that you're stacking on top of it. Or it could be that there's an opportunity because of your proximity to a university, or proximity to a hospital, or proximity to somewhere where a rent per room strategy might work. It could be that you then do a HMO type strategy on top of that subdivision. Or it could be that you're going to say, well, now this is actually a perfect opportunity because we're close to shops, we're close to public transport, and we're close to a hospital. So maybe I'm actually going to do an NDIS type strategy on there. So you can see the underlying strategy was your subdivision, but you're going to, I guess, tactically have a look at, well, given the physical geography of where this particular project is and the demographics of the area right now, is there another layer that I can actually add on top of what I'm already doing to try and get a few more, I guess, a few more dollars out of this project and add to that. So anytime you can layer a couple of different development strategies on top, then you're obviously going to have the potential to stack a few more dollars into your pocket as well. So now when you start to do things like I guess a discount acquisition strategy, then you've got your main development strategy, and then you stack on top of that, I guess, a secondary strategy such as an NDIS, and then you've got some exit strategies that allow you to cash that in relatively early. What you're doing is you're layering all these strategies on top of each other and stacking them, as I say, to try and get the best outcome given your particular circumstances. So that's really, I guess, the stacking process per se. What I'm going to do now is go back. I can see a few questions and comments in the field, so I'm just going to have a look at who's got some questions. So a number of people have said hello, so hello everybody. Deb says, hey Rob, looking great in 4K on my new second-hand Windows PC. Well, that's great. Deb, great that you've got a brand new second-hand PC. Good to see. Other than that, a lot of people that have joined, but no actual questions. So I'm going to put it over to you guys now to say, have you got any questions at all on stacking strategies and how you can actually layer multiple profits into your process, and how you can use those stack strategies to be quite flexible in your acquisition and your development. So while I'm waiting for that to come through, I'm going to take myself a sip. Whilst those questions are coming through, and I can't see any just yet, I will go back and take the time to give you our logistics coming up. So in Brisbane, December the 21st is going to be the Christmas party for Brisbane. There is no actual meetup, just confirming no actual meetup. It will just be Christmas drinks, a little bit too close to Christmas, and we're going to socialise there. In Sydney, our next meeting is on January the 25th. So that is actually the Australia Day long weekend. So I'm anticipating a little bit of challenge with numbers, given the I guess the date, but it is still going to be happening on that weekend. And in Melbourne, there is no meeting in January, given that the first Saturday of the month is a little bit too close to New Year. So we're going to have two meetings in February. The first one is on February the 1st, and the second one is on February the 29th. Given that it is a leap year, it is going to be February the 29th. So, okay, I can see one comment here from Gagan. Great info, Rob. Very simple to understand. Thank you, mate. Appreciate that. And I guess more than happy to, I think you've reached out and said hello to us during the week. So I've got in my diary to give you a call on Monday, mate. So looking forward to that. Other than that, folks, as I can't see any questions come through, oh, here's one. Deb says, what about relocating an existing house on a site you want to develop to somewhere else altogether? So that is technically, I guess, a stacking strategy of sorts, Deb. So that's a great question. I guess there's a couple of different ways that actually can be done. So firstly, you can acquire a home for near on free, given that a lot of people are actually giving away homes in order to free up vacant land. So a lot of places, a lot of people actually publish on Gumtree and things like that to say give away free house. So you can pick up one of those relatively quick. And even where you can't, you can actually go to somebody who specializes in house relocations, and they generally have a yard where they've got anywhere from 20 to 100 homes that are sitting there secondhand waiting to be picked up. And you know, they, for a fee, they will actually deliver and install that on site. So that's very easy. It saves a lot of cost in the actual construct, but there's a few elements to consider and I've actually done one of these presentations previously on relocating homes, and I'll do another one again coming up soon. But when you relocate a home onto a site, you effectively are considered to be building a brand new home, even though it's secondhand. So you need to make sure that it's up to Australian standards for the National Construction Code. You need to make sure that the energy efficiency rating is right. You need to make sure that all the electrical appliances are right, all of those sorts of things, that the roof is tied down appropriately, et cetera, et cetera. So yes, it's a great way to pick up a very cost-effective home and put that into a very cost-effective block of land. So great way of doing that. And Jack says, good presentation. Thank you, Jack. Appreciate that. And I can see Russell has just joined right at the point where we are very at the end, mate. So I'm going to say hi and nearly bye. So, okay, folks, given that we've been here for a good 40-odd minutes and there's not many questions coming through, I'm going to call that a day. So thank you all for your time. It be a great and prosperous Christmas and New Year for everybody. I'm looking forward to a very quiet, very minimal but quiet spell over the Christmas break, and how that's going to refresh me to take on a new year. We've got some bigger and better things planned for Property Developer Network next year, and I can't wait to tell you all about what that is. So please stay tuned. We are growing from strength to strength, and we are trying to add more and more value back to you guys. So I can't wait to tell you all about that. And Brad's got one final question just as I'm running out the door. Would you subdivide a house on an 800 square meter block worth 200K, or would you have to wait for prices to go up due to build costs? Brad, what I would answer to that is I would always do a feasibility. It's not about the acquisition cost. It's about your total development cost and the income from the gross realized value at the end. And so I've seen properties where 200K acquisition makes a lot of money, and I've seen the exact opposite as well. So what I would say though is a typical rule of thumb is if it's a cheap purchase, then chances are it's going to be a cheap exit, which means that it's much, much harder to typically gain back the costs of the subdivision itself. So do your numbers, mate. See what your GRV is on selling the finished product at the end, and do a reverse feasibility. So what's the finished product going to sell for? How much money do I need to make its profit? Subtract my development costs, and then that will then tell me how much I should be paying for the land. So hopefully that helps, Brad. And other than that, Deb says, thanks. I actually meant taking a house off-site you've already bought for another development purpose. I think you mean selling the home, but I'm not quite sure, Deb. Happy to take that one offline. But I am now going to call that a day. My drink is calling me, as is my couch. So Merry Christmas to all. And I am looking forward to seeing you all in the new year. For those of you in Brisbane, I'm looking forward to seeing you next Saturday at 2 o'clock. Bye for now.